Without further ado, let's dive in with our first guest here. Lisa, pleasure to have you on the show here. Tell us a little about yourself first.
Sure. So I've been with Truckstop for about 4 years. Right now, I lead all of our product for risk, fraud, compliance solutions that we provide to our broker customers. And what makes my job really exciting, I came from the customer side of things for my first 3 years at Truckstop. So managing all of our customer experience, and the best part of my job is able to bring our customer's voice directly into our product strategy to make sure we're delivering best products.
And I think that's really good. Coming from the front lines, customer facing, fraud has exploded. I used to joke with people that we used to have a very high trust kind of business where I could call you and tell you my MC number, and you would say, yeah, that's Thomas.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about some of these challenges now.
Yeah, so what's interesting is I think that a lot of the conversation about fraud these days is that fraud is new, it's a new thing, and it's so different, and it's definitely different than it ever has been. But Truckstop has actually been tracking fraud and stolen loads and all different kinds of nefarious behavior for almost 30 years. And so what we can see is that fraud has actually always been a problem in the market, but because of the pandemic as well as technology changes, what we've been seeing in the past couple of years is just unlike anything that we have ever seen before, and that by and large, brokerages have not been preparing themselves to adequately protect against bad actors who tend to be faster, smarter, and more technologically savvy than how a lot of these businesses were built in the first place.
And from your experiences as well, have there been any kind of changes in terms of the nature of fraud? Is there something new, or is it kind of a more refined version of the same old process?
It's a little bit of everything. So they're definitely getting more sophisticated, and what they'll do is a lot of sort of pressure testing. Can I get in through this angle? Can I get in through that angle? And then once they find some kind of weakness, they're really good at exploiting it. And so as a broker, what's really important is to be able to find a way to get access to a really wide range of data and visibility so that you can then layer intelligence on top of it and then integrate it across your business practices, and ideally really automate it so that you're removing as much opportunity for human error as possible.
And so, I've been privy to like random text messages with links, or hey, some people send ACHs to see if you can bill a carrier or a brokerage. What are some of the more common ways that these bad actors are trying to probe the defenses before they can really get in?
Yeah, so something that we've started doing here is really thinking about tactics and turning them into personas, because we find that it makes it a lot easier for a broker to be able to identify them. So one that we talk about a lot these days is a zombie carrier. So you're typically a carrier who has had, you've been doing sort of perfectly fine business, you decide to sell your MC, all of a sudden we see a really big flurry of onboarding activity with a bunch of different brokers from a carrier who had been really, really stable or maybe not done any business in a long period of time. Very high indicator that that MC has been purchased, and that then by typically a bad actor who is trying to take advantage of that. We also see a lot of phishing attempts, which we like to call anglers. They're kind of coming in, doing some social engineering, trying to send these text messages. And so one of the things that we talk to brokers and carriers a lot about is just basic education. We find that this is at the end of the day a relationship business, and sometimes those easiest things are the ones that are overlooked, and really leveraging relationships with carriers to educate them. Here's how you should expect to be engaged with me. Here are things to look out for, so that you're really helping out the carrier as well, and coming from that place of trust to begin with.
I've had that happen before. It's got to be hard, especially now that the prevalence of dispatching services, where a dispatcher will be in charge of multiple MC numbers, and then how do you know if your dispatching service is not actually the other one? Well, tell us a little bit about, especially from that technology standpoint. One of the instances you mentioned was carrier packets. Is that literally an example of an older MC, 3 to 5 years, suddenly fills out 200 RMIS packets or something? Is that the kind of stuff we need to start paying attention to?
So that's something that we monitor on our side. Is so across our entire ecosystem of products, what we're really looking at is behavioral patterns and what might be changing or different from what we've seen to be historical behavior. So we can see if someone is filling out a flurry of onboarding packets, that's not their typical behavior. We can flag that in our system, flag that for our broker community as well. But also what we're thinking about is how do we do an identity check to be able to say, are you actually who you say you are? And we leverage ID verification technology for that, where we have a carrier submit their government ID, they take a selfie, we make sure that those two things match. We make sure that that contact information then matches the information that we have in our database, all to ensure that that carrier is who they say they are. We also then do a check to say, are you an authorized representative of this MC? So doing checks to make sure, do you know enough information about this MC to prove that you are legitimate and can do business on their behalf? And then the third thing that we have implemented is a risk check. So through our product risk factors, we leverage billions of data points across our entire product ecosystem, like I said, to be able to understand these behavioral patterns. And if it flags that there is a carrier who's onboarding at any point or in a broker's network that represents too much risk, we're able to flag them and block them and notify the broker for them to do at least more due diligence.
And from your experiences in helping out customers as well, understanding the pain points, is there carrier sized, when we're talking about the potential for fraud and the risk, is it a small carrier, a large carrier? Is the risk across the board? Does size matter?
Yeah, what we see is that risk definitely looks different depending on the profile of the carrier. So through our risk factors product, part of what we do is we have our whole data science team who's really looking at how does risk get assessed differently from carrier characteristics, and how do we make sure that we're not over impacting a large carrier fleet versus a small carrier fleet, because you would expect a large carrier fleet to have more reused phone numbers, for example, right? And so we don't want to be too blunt in how we're really thinking about fraud indicators. So we do a lot of calibration to make sure that we're balancing that correctly. We take a lot of customer feedback as well. So if a customer is saying, there's something miscalibrated about this kind of carrier, we immediately go back and understand, why is our algorithm flagging it this way, and how can we add additional nuance to make sure that we're calibrated?
And looking at like geographic factors as well when we're trying to do it. I know the old joke, the Glendale Mafia, or the Chicago carrier network, where you both need them and don't need them. Someone's going to come after me for that. But is that something when looking into the data set? Is there a geographic risk factor? I'm prefacing this because as we're also seeing more nearshoring, we're going to see more carriers enter the system. Do I need to worry about location?
So we tend to see less risk about location, broadly speaking. I think there are certain exceptions where we know there are sort of high-risk areas. But again, I think that a lot of it has to do with behavioral patterns and when a pattern starts to get broken. So we pay a lot of attention to IP addresses. We have our huge product network with over 60,000 carriers on our load board and RMIS and interacting with us in all different kinds of ways. And so we track whenever there has been an incident with a carrier and associated with a particular IP, we can block and flag that IP address, so understanding when that might be used, and also understanding when behavior differs from where they're actually taking loads versus where we see search behavior, and any time that those things don't actually add up, it can help give us some additional intelligence.
So like if I'm an intra-Florida carrier and I'm suddenly looking for Washington State, and that's all I'm searching, and you see me making movements on, that would be a suspicious activity.
That's an example of something that we might be trying to look for, yeah.
Looking at the technology and the sophistications, everyone's talking about API integrations. Brokerages and carriers are more willing to do it. Do you ever worry about, is that another leading indicator in terms of suddenly this API is scraping everything when before they never used it? Is that something where the technology integration is adding an extra layer of concern if it does get penetrated and the account is now compromised?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a whole team that takes sort of reports in from customers of, we think that there's a load posted on our behalf that's not actually ours. It doesn't have our correct information, and we do a lot of investigation to understand what's real here, how do we take it down, how do we get that account back up. But we also do tons of proactive screening, again, to understand, is login behavior normal, is API access here normal, to make sure that we're certainly keeping our system safe, but more importantly, that their accounts are kept safe as well.
And looking ahead, kind of best practices, we'll start with carriers. Is there anything, if I'm especially a carrier and I'm not as familiar with the risk and the threats, is there anything I should be doing based on your experiences or what's happened to other folks who have been a victim of fraud?
Yes, so from a carrier perspective, it is all about keeping your accounts safe. So again, I think basic InfoSec education is the lowest hanging fruit that just isn't done at the end of the day. Carriers tend to be less technologically savvy. They might not have any kind of tech education. What we see is that they use the same password for every single tool that they operate. They're not familiar with how to flag phishing texts or phishing emails, and so the most common incident that we see with carriers is purely that their accounts get compromised, and because their accounts get compromised, they use the same password across all of these tools. You're giving access to a bad actor to pretty much everything that you have. So that, hands down, is the best information for a carrier, and carrier sales reps are the ones who are best positioned to give them that education, because they're the ones who really form that relationship with them.
So it's almost like as a broker, you're also acting like as a partner, and then, hey, I'm trying to book you on this load. You've just been flagged. Something's up with your stuff. Have you changed your password recently? That kind of building relationship and helping when beforehand the carrier may not know until they try to book a load.
Exactly. We really think about building these businesses based on trust first. And so you certainly want to make sure that you're detecting fraud and you're detecting bad behavior, but really looking for those opportunities to build trust at every step along the way. And so that's partly validating that a carrier is who they say they are. That's making sure that they are qualified to do business with you, but then also continuing to establish that relationship, know each other as people, so that you become the first person that carrier calls whenever they're ready to take their next load.
And in the event of a carrier, we got a little bit of time left. In the event I do have fraud and I no longer can book loads, what are the steps I need to take to get back into it in terms of having that access and being able to book on these platforms? Because I can imagine if I do get cut off, that could be a big source of my income.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, we see that carriers tend to not actually engage with the police frequently enough when they have had some kind of compromised incident. We've been forging a relationship with the FBI over the past couple of years. I can say that we are really well informed of a lot of task force and efforts that they have instituted to really make sure that they're a strong partner to the industry in solving the problem. And the best way that they can help the industry is by being really informed about what has happened and reported incidents. So that is sort of the step number one if something has happened. I would also then make sure that you are reaching out to your partners. So as a broker, as a vendor, we all have the opportunity to understand, get more information, and make our own decisions about whether or not we feel that we want to sort of wave flags, reset those accounts once we can verify enough information. And so that's the second step that a carrier should take.
It's not the end of the world, but you need to do your due diligence and go through the right steps.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, Lisa, really appreciate your time as well. It was a really fun talk, given the fact of the importance of this topic. Not only is it evergreen, but the forest is growing right now.
For
sure. Folks want to learn more about Truckstop, get in contact. What's the best way?
Truckstop.com. That has all the information about all of our products, and you can also find me personally on LinkedIn, Lisa Haubenstock.
Really appreciate your time, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.